Sometimes mistakes are made that nonetheless produce glorious results. That's exactly what the last generation of Formula 1 cars, the wider, high-downforce machines of 2017 to 2021, were. They were monsters, the fastest F1 cars ever, yet they not only completely failed to solve the problems these regulations were originally meant to solve, but in many ways made them worse. But they still stand as the most remarkable cars in Grand Prix history. So while they may have been a mistake, the 5 years these monsters bestrode the circuits of the world will be remembered among the most spectacular in F1. So just how fast were these cars, what made them so quick, and what was so flawed about their genesis? Amid the ongoing challenge to produce cars that are not just fast but raceable, F1 lost its way while formulating the major rule changes for 2017. The result was higher downforce, significantly quicker cars that were dramatically different to the previous generation of machines that raced from 2014 to 2016. The car width was increased from 1.8 metres to 2 metres, with the minimum weight rising to 728 kilos. The front tyres were made 6 cm wider, the rears 8 cm wider for extra grip, while the rear wing was made 20 cm wider and 15 cm lower. And the rear diffuser was made 5 cm higher and wider, as well as 17.5 cm longer. The front wing width also increased by 15 cm to 1.8 metres. The result was a significant rise in downforce. It also meant a big drop in lap times. The original target set by F1's strategy group in May 2015 was for the 2017 cars to be 5 to 6 seconds per lap faster, although that was at a point when the intention was to bring back refuelling. That idea was soon dropped as a result of the teams presenting data demonstrating refuelling would make the racing worse, rather than improving it. Even so, based on the pace at the 16 circuits that appeared on both the 2015 and 17 calendars, where a comparison can be made using the fastest single lap set at each event, the average lap time drop was 4.2 seconds. But that was just the start for this generation of cars, which evolved rapidly. While teams worked to improve performance, there were also several further rule changes. In 2018, the Halo cockpit protection system was added, initially a controversial measure, but one that quickly proved its worth for Sauber driver Charles Leclerc when Fernando Alonso's McLaren landed on top of him at the start of the Belgian Grand Prix. Shark fins and T-wings were also banned, with the minimum weight rising to 734 kilos. In 2019 there were further changes, with the front wing made 20 cm wider to a span of 2 metres, as well as being made 2 cm taller and 2.5 cm deeper. The number of elements was also restricted to 5, meaning far simpler profiles with the flicks and protrusions a thing of the past, while only 2 strakes were permitted on the underside of the main plane. The end plates were also simplified, with the maximum allowable outward curve reduced. The rear wing was also made 10 cm wider and the end plates simplified. The barge boards were also tweaked, being made 10 cm longer horizontally but 15 cm shorter. We will come back to the reasons for these changes shortly, but they did curb the rate of lap time improvement. The regulations didn't change for what was meant to be the final season of their use in 2020, but the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic meant that the cars were largely carried over for the following season. However, for 2021 a controversial package of 4 aerodynamic tweaks was brought in, comprising a triangular cut to the rear part of the floor on both sides, the elimination of floor slots, the reduction in the length of the diffuser strakes, and the narrowing of winglets on the lower part of the rear brake ducts. This meant a drop in overall downforce. This was to prevent overloading the Pirelli tyres that were carried over for a 3rd consecutive year, although as it hurt the low-rake Mercedes and Aston Martin, there were claims they were motivated by a desire to tackle the Silver Arrow's dominance. For 2021, the minimum weight also rose to a hefty 752 kilos. As a result, it was the 2020 cars that were the quickest, not just of this generation of cars, but in all of F1 history. What's more, from 2017 to 2021, when this generation of cars raced, all 28 venues used produced their fastest ever official F1 lap times using the current configurations. 12 of those records were set in 2020, a season that only used 14 different venues. But while the cars were certainly fast, they fell short in other areas. But before we get on to that, a quick thank you to everyone who has subscribed to the Races channel and watched and liked our videos. This makes it possible for us to do what we do, and means we will keep producing videos throughout the winter as we wait for the next Formula 1 season to start. So if you're enjoying this and don't want to miss any of our videos, make sure you have subscribed and also consider chiming the notifications bell so you know the millisecond there's something new to watch. We've explained how fast this generation of cars were, but it was very obvious that they failed to fix many of F1's problems. Concerns about the difficulty of overtaking without the assistance of the DRS, the quality of the racing and the predictability were part of the discussions at this stage, but eventually the call for faster, higher downforce cars became overwhelming. This was partly because of fan feedback, but also because of driver criticisms of the unpopular cars of 2014 to 2016, which were felt not to be fast enough or demanding enough for drivers. Then McLaren driver Fernando Alonso was among the critics, at one stage suggesting F1 cars did not have a big enough performance advantage over Formula 2 machinery. So while the regulations achieved their objective of lowering lap times well, they did little to tackle the fundamental problems. They also served to make following another car even more difficult, particularly the fact the rear wing was lower. Combined with the outwash front wings, this made the turbulent air more of a problem, which is what led to the aforementioned 2019 changes. These were based on research conducted by F1 and the FIA for what are now the 2022 regulations, picking out several key areas in an attempt to make a short-term improvement. This made relatively little difference to how easy it was to follow, but were reckoned at least to prevent the problem getting even worse during the final 3 years of these regulations. This means that despite the spectacular races we saw in 2021, overtaking moves were still overly reliant on the use of the DRS, with drivers struggling if following another car. And it didn't even need them to be particularly close behind for there to be an effect, with the problem detectable while 6 seconds behind or even more thanks to the airflow disturbance. The upshot was that the cars were great to drive, particularly over a flying lap, but that did little for the quality of the racing. This is why Ross Brawn calls raceability the key target of the 2022 regulations. These cars may have been a mistake, but that doesn't mean they were not memorable. Although they were larger and heavier than the nimble V10 powered cars of the early years of the 21st century, and therefore a little lazier on turning, they were also amazingly quick. But barely a race or qualifying session passed by without drivers complaining about how difficult it was to follow another car or to overtake, not to mention the problems caused by the temperature-sensitive Pirelli tyres that usually made it impossible to push hard through a long stint. But while these machines required too much management, in qualifying or on an all-out attack lap in the race, they were spectacular. No wonder the drivers will miss them. How much they do so will likely depend on the big question of how quick, or slow, the 2022 cars will be compared to the last generation. They are heavier, simplified aerodynamically, and with far more prescriptive rules, meaning the lap time deficit was expected to be large. But recently there have been suggestions that the gap could be negligible for cars that are expected to have a little less downforce in slower corners, but potentially more in fast ones, thanks to the ground effect Venturis down each side of the car. F1's Pat Simmons has suggested that the cars might only be half a second slower, something we delved into in a recent video. The feeling in the paddock is that it's a question of when rather than if the next generation of cars get to a similar level to the 2021 machines, and in time, perhaps they could even match or eclipse the 2020 cars. But whatever happens, the 2017 to 2021 F1 cars will be fondly remembered by fans and drivers as the quickest over a lap ever seen in Grand Prix racing. Let us know in the comments what your best memories are of this period of F1, and don't forget to like and subscribe.